is what I'd like to be.
Big League Chew, man-sized wads of great tasting shredded bubble gums.
Shrinky dink, if you can drink.
Do you ever think about those things from the 80s? The ones too good to forget, but somehow faded anyway? These were the everyday joys that lit up our childhoods, filled our homes, and shaped how we laughed, played, and felt connected. What changed so quietly that we stopped noticing they were gone? Do you remember pulling out your Trapper Keeper notebook in class like it was treasure? It was not just a school supply, it was an identity. Loud Velcro, vivid neon colors, geometric prints, maybe even a unicorn or a race car if you were lucky. It made organizing feel like a power move. Each folder inside had its own mission. Homework, stickers, secret notes, doodles of your crush's name repeated 300 times. There was something about snapping that plastic shut that made you feel like you had your life together at age 10. Even teachers had to pause mid-roll call because someone's Trapper Keeper practically exploded open. And you could always hear it, too. That unmistakable rip of Velcro from across the room. It was the schoolyard version of starting up a muscle car. If you had the right one, you were not just a kid doing schoolwork. You were somebody. These notebooks were banned in some schools for being too distracting, which honestly made them even cooler. That's the 80s for you, where even your loose-leaf paper came with attitude. How did we ever trade that in for Google Docs? If you grew up in the 80s, Teddy Ruxman was not just a toy. He was your friend. You did not just play with him. You listened to him, eyes moving, mouth sinking to the cassette in his back. Story time became something more, something kind of magical. He told you tales with that gentle voice and those blinking eyes that made it feel like he actually saw you, like you mattered. Kids would gather around him like he was a talking oracle with a fabric body and a beige plastic face. You would press that play button like it was a secret handshake. You never got tired of the same stories because Teddy made them feel brand new every time. His voice was calm, kind, and weirdly wise, like a bedtime librarian just for you. Some kids talked back to him, convinced he might answer if they just believed hard enough. And when the batteries started to fade and his voice got slow and creepy, we still could not let him go. He wore that tiny blue vest like he was ready for adventure at any moment. You would tuck him in next to you at night, hoping he might whisper one last bedtime story as you drifted off. He broke easily. Batteries died, cassette heads jammed, and eventually the mouth stopped moving. But somehow, even when broken, he still felt special. Like he had said something important, something just for you. The 80s had a way of making even robots feel full of heart. And no app today has ever looked a child in the eyes and told a story quite like Teddy did. The Sears Wish Book was the one catalog that could make a child's heart skip a beat. That thing was thick, like 3 textbooks mashed into one, and it landed in your mailbox like a present before the presents. Kids did not just flip through it. We studied it, like archaeologists uncovering the secrets of the holiday season. The toys were always at the back, every page filled with dreams. Every kid had a strategy. Some went straight for the action figures, others flipped to dolls, and some scouted electronics like junior tech scouts. The glossy pages smelled like ink and promise. You could spot your wish list item a mile away and immediately scream, "This one!" at your parents. No one expected to get everything, but that never stopped us from circling 10 things on each page. It turned hope into a hobby. You circled what you wanted, starred the must-haves, maybe even folded pages like bookmarks of desire. You knew not everything would make it under the tree, but just the act of wishing felt powerful. The Sears Wish Book turned regular living rooms into boardrooms where kids made deals with Santa. Parents listened with poker faces while quietly budgeting in their heads. It wasn't just about getting gifts. It was about building anticipation, hope, and joy, one glossy page at a time. Kids would literally sleep with that thing under their pillow. Amazon might have the speed, but it never had that magic. Not like this. The Sears Wish Book was the ultimate Christmas hype machine, and flipping through it was the holiday spirit in paper form. Saturday morning cartoons and cereal were the holy grail of 80s childhood. No alarms, no school, just footy pajamas, sugary cereal, and a lineup of animated chaos. Your parents were still asleep, and for a few hours, the house belonged to you. Cartoons were not just shows. They were events. You had to watch live or miss out. No DVR, no streaming. You learned time management through Smurfs and gummy bears. Some kids made full schedules the night before, which shows to watch and which cereal to pour. We stared at that glowing TV like it was beaming in joy from another planet. There was no such thing as too early if it meant you got to see the intro to Thundercats. Sometimes you'd scream for someone to bring you more milk because you didn't want to miss a frame. And when it was over, it felt like the world slowed back down. You planned bathroom breaks around commercial clusters. The cereal box was entertainment too. Puzzles, games, even cut-out mail-in offers. Half the time it felt like you were eating sugar-flavored plastic. But we loved it. Marshmallow bits that turned milk into neon sludge. Crunch that could slice your gums. It did not matter. What mattered was the ritual. This was freedom. This was joy. The kind only a bowl of Cookie Crisp and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles could deliver. Kids today might binge entire series, but they will never know the adrenaline of racing to the couch before He-Man came on. Showbiz Pizza Place was a sensory overload in the best possible way. Sticky floors, greasy pizza, that constant mechanical clunk-clunk from arcade machines. And of course, the Rock-a-Fire explosion. Animatronic animals with questionable wiring but unforgettable charm. You did not just eat there, you witnessed a show. Billy Bob, Mitzi, and the gang playing weirdly impressive covers of pop songs while you clutched your tokens like gold. The stage curtain would open, and kids froze like it was Broadway. You could barely hear the show over the buzz of arcade beeps and kids screaming with joy. Everyone had a favorite animatronic, and yes, we believed they were real. We danced in front of the stage like it was a concert, even though the bear's mouth barely moved. That pizza? Greasy and amazing. And do not even get us started on the ball pit, a jungle of chaos and childhood dreams. There was something kind of creepy about it too, but we didn't care. We were hypnotized. The mix of food, games, and rock and roll robots was the recipe for childhood euphoria. It smelled like pizza and dreams. It felt like freedom and fun. And even when Chuck E. Cheese eventually took over, it never quite hit the same. Showbiz had that wild edge, that sense that anything, even a bear singing Elvis, could happen. Do you remember scratch and sniff stickers? Of course you do. You could smell them before you even peeled them off. They came in sheets, rows, rolls, and every kid had a binder full of them, organized like precious gemstones. Some smelled amazing. Bubblegum, root beer, watermelon. Others smelled like socks, cheese, and for some reason, gasoline. And we loved all of it. Teachers used them like currency. You aced a quiz, you got a grape sticker. Instant dopamine. Recess turned into sticker swap meets. Deals were made, friendships were tested. You knew which ones were rare, which ones still had their scent, and which ones had been scratched too much. There were entire sticker clubs with made-up rules and rankings. Getting a smelly pickle sticker might have been weird, but it was gold. These were not just rewards. They were identity. Sticker trading was a full-blown economy. Kids became stockbrokers in puffy glitter unicorns and smelly pizza slices. That moment when you scratched just a little too hard and ruined the scent forever? Tragic. There was magic in the smallest things back then. A sticker was more than a sticker. It was bragging rights, personality, power. You could not send a scented emoji. You had to earn that pizza sticker with a flawless spelling test. Peach Pit lip smackers were a middle school girl's rite of passage. Oversized tubes, crazy flavors, and a smell that hit you from 5 lockers down. If you had a lip smacker, you used it, constantly. On the bus, in class, at recess. It was less about hydration and more about the vibe. This was lip balm with personality. You were not just moisturizing, you were making a statement. You liked cherry cola or Dr. Pepper or wild raspberry. You were bold, fun.trendy. Some girls collected them like trophies, lining up a rainbow of tubes on their dresser. Sharing a flavor was basically the junior high version of a trust fall. And those tubes were indestructible. They survived backpacks, pockets, and the washing machine. They were conversation starters, trade bait, and tiny totems of tween power. Somehow, lip smackers made you feel grown up and silly at the same time. You might not have been allowed to wear makeup yet, but you could definitely rock some bubblegum gloss. The 80s understood that fun came in tubes the size of glue sticks. A McDonald's birthday party was a certified event in the 80s. You did not just have a party, you had it at the Golden Arches. There were paper crowns, Ronald McDonald placemats, balloons taped to everything. Your whole class crammed into the party room while a teenager in a visor passed out Happy Meals like they were gourmet. And those character plates? Collectible gold, Grimace, Hamburglar, Mayor McCheese, legends. The play place was basically a jungle gym of dreams and danger, half fun, half bruises. And that cardboard cake topper with Ronald's face? Iconic. You would blow out candles while surrounded by red plastic booths and the smell of fryer oil. Kids ran wild in the play area, probably with ketchup still on their faces. It was loud, chaotic, and perfect. No Pinterest decorations, no themed cakes, just joy in its purest, greasiest form. And that feeling of being the kid of the hour. Everyone got a toy. Everyone went home sticky and happy. McDonald's made birthdays feel bigger than life. And honestly, what more could you ask for? Big League Chew made every kid feel like a pro athlete, even if they had never touched a baseball in their life. Shredded bubble gum stuffed in a foil pouch that looked like tobacco. It was rebellious, grown-up, and totally ridiculous. You would cram way too much into your mouth until you could barely speak, just so you could spit pink slime and nod like a big leaguer. This was not a polite chew. This was a full-on flavor explosion. Wild grape. Original watermelon. It smelled like a candy factory on fire. Coaches hated it. Parents rolled their eyes. But kids loved it. There was something about holding that pouch that made you feel like you belonged in the World Series, even if you were just chewing on your front porch in dirty sneakers. The pouch was part of the fun. You felt like you were in the dugout, even if you were just on the swing set. It was sugary, messy, and never lasted more than 5 minutes. And yet, every kid would go right back for another handful. Because in the 80s, chewing gum came with swagger. There was a glow, a beat, and the smell of popcorn and sweat in the air. That could only mean one thing. It was time for a Bonnie Bell roller skating party. You laced up your rental skates, probably in some neon color, and hit the floor like you were entering Studio 54. Except, with more bruises. The disco ball spun, the lights blinked, and Madonna blasted from the speakers. There were couple skates, speed rounds, and the awkward moment someone fell and took out half the line. You tried to impress your crush without breaking an ankle. The Bonnie Bell reference? That was the cherry lip smacker girls wore, the scent that filled the rink and lingered in lockers for weeks. Boys smelled like bubblegum and sweat. Girls smelled like strawberry gloss and Aquanet. And everyone smelled like fun. You clutched your paper tickets like they were currency in a candy economy. And when your name got called over the loudspeaker for a prize, that was your rock star moment. There were prize tickets, nachos with nuclear cheese, and that one kid who could moonwalk in skates. Roller rinks were the social hubs of the 80s. You made friends. You made memories. And if you made it through without falling, you were a legend. Jelly shoes were not footwear. They were an experience. You either remember the squish-squish sound as you walked, or the moment you peeled them off and saw the pattern sunburned into your feet. They were see-through, sparkly, and made entirely out of plastic that somehow managed to be both flexible and soul-crushing at the same time. You bought them at discount stores or in wire bins outside the pharmacy, and they came in every color imaginable: neon pink, transparent glitter, electric blue. If Barbie had a shoe closet, it was definitely full of jellies, and you wore them with pride, even when they cut into your heels or collected sweat like little foot greenhouses. There was no arch support, no breathability, but none of that mattered. They were fun, and in the 80s, fun always came first. You could wear them to the beach, the mall, even church if your mom let you. They were noisy, impractical, and often left you with blisters, but they looked like magic. And let's be honest, a shoe that could match every single color in your Lisa Frank folder? That was worth the pain. Speaking of magic, nothing screamed, "I am an 80s kid," louder than Lisa Frank stationery. You could spot it from across the room. That blinding rainbow of dolphins, unicorns, and leopards wearing sunglasses. It was not just paper, it was a lifestyle. Kids built entire identities around their Lisa Frank collections. Trapper keepers, pencil cases, stickers, all in highlighter bright colors that looked like they were designed by a unicorn who drank glitter. You would write notes to your friends in swirly gel pens, fold them into little origami hearts, and pass them in class like you were sending coded messages from a rainbow dimension. There was something joyful and weirdly empowering about it. You felt cool, even if all you did was doodle stars in the margin. You knew which animals were yours. Maybe you were a panda kid. Maybe you were all in on the neon tiger. But you had allegiance, and it meant something. Lisa Frank made boring school supplies feel like party favors. And when you opened your folder and saw those bright, bouncing animals staring back at you, even math homework felt like a celebration. Now let us talk about Garbage Pail Kids cards, the exact opposite of Lisa Frank, and honestly, just as iconic. These things were gross, weird, and absolutely irresistible. Each card had some mutant or misfit with a name like Leaky Lindsay or Barfin' Barbara. It was bodily fluids, absurd violence, and puns. Lots of puns. Your parents hated them, which made you love them even more. Kids traded these like Pokemon before Pokemon was a thing. If you had a rare one, you were basically king of the lunchroom. They were banned in schools almost immediately, but not before every single kid had at least 5 tucked away in their desk or hidden behind a loose page in their math book. The art was wild. These were baby dolls doing things babies were not supposed to do. But that was the point. Garbage Pail Kids were funny because they were too much. The 80s were full of polished, shiny things, and this was the antidote. These cards let kids feel edgy without actually getting in trouble. They were trading cards, yes, but they were also rebellion in 2x3-inch form. There was no better feeling than coming home, dropping your backpack, grabbing a snack, and planting yourself in front of the television for the Friday night TGIF lineup. The week was over. It was time to laugh. Shows like Full House, Family Matters, Step by Step, and Perfect Strangers turned Friday nights into something special. This was not just passive viewing. This was tradition. Families planned around TGIF. You sat on the carpet, elbow to elbow with your siblings, while your parents pretended not to enjoy it just as much. These shows were funny, but they were also safe. They made the world feel okay, even if everything else was upside down. There was always a lesson, always a hug, always a catchphrase. You could count on it like clockwork. "Did I do that?" became a national anthem. There was no streaming, no DVR. If you missed it, you missed it. That made it sacred. These shows were warm, funny, and a little corny, but they were ours. And in a world that changed fast, TGIF stayed the same, for a little while anyway. If you were alive in the 80s, then you definitely knew someone who wore friendship pins on their sneakers. Safety pins, threaded with colored beads, clipped to your shoelaces like tiny badges of honor. It was homemade, heartfelt, and totally fashionable. You made them for your best friend, your cousin, your crush. Each one had a pattern, a code, beads that meant something, even if you were the only one who understood. Making them was a quiet ritual. You sat on your bedroom floor with a bowl of beads, working out who got which combination. And when someone gave you one, that was love. That was trust. It turned your plain old Keds into a mobile friendship bracelet. It was also kind of punk in its own way, a little rebellious, a little crafty. There was no brand name or marketing plan, just kids sharing something small and meaningful, a message spelled in plastic, a hug in bead form, and every time you tied your shoes, you remembered who made yours. Before nightlights got all high-tech and motion-sensitive, we had glowworms. A plush toy with a soft vinyl face that lit up when you hugged it. That was it. And it was perfect. The light was barely enough to see anything, but it felt like safety. You hugged your glowworm, and the whole world got just a little less scary. They came in pastel colors, mint green, baby pink, soft yellow, and somehow always looked like they were smiling, even though their face never moved. There were versions that sang, some that came with lullabies, but the basic glowworm was all you needed. For some kids, it was their first nightlight. For others, it was their only friend during scary thunderstorms or bad dreams. It was simple, gentle, and always there. We grew up with stuffed animals that glowed like hope in the dark. Not many toys today can say that. You would not think claymation raisins would become music legends, but that is exactly what happened with the California Raisins. They had sunglasses, they had soul, and yes, they had their own album. What started as a commercial turned into a phenomenon. Suddenly, raisins were cool. You had lunchboxes, t-shirts, figurines, even Halloween costumes. They sang Motown hits with more heart than most real bands. I Heard It Through the Grapevine was never the same again. Kids who had no idea what Motown was suddenly knew every word. These raisins had attitude, swagger, and way more cultural impact than anyone expected. There was even a Saturday morning cartoon series. Because why not give raisins a plotline? It was peak 80s. Take something random, make it lovable, and turn it into a movement. They should not have worked. But they did. And the fact that we were obsessed with dried fruit that could carry a tune? That is peak 80s. It was weird, catchy, and totally unforgettable. Just like everything else from that decade. There was one myth that every kid in the 80s knew. If you eat Pop Rocks and drink soda, your stomach will explode. Of course, it was not true. But we were not taking any chances. You would hear it on the playground. My cousin's friend's brother tried it and had to go to the hospital. Total nonsense, but it felt real. Pop Rocks were already insane on their own. They fizzed, they cracked, they made your tongue feel like it was dancing. But add soda? That was playing with fire. Kids dared each other. Some chickened out, some went for it, expecting instant detonation. Even though the science did not hold up, the fear was part of the fun. It turned snack time into an urban legend with stakes. The myth turned candy into a science experiment, and Pop Rocks became a legend. The truth is, it was just sugar and gas, nothing more. But the thrill, the suspense, that was real. Sometimes the best part of candy was not eating it, but wondering what might happen if you did. You remember Koosh balls, right? Those floppy rubber tentacles, the ones that felt like a mix between a sea creature and a stress toy? They were bright, bouncy, and made for throwing at walls, friends, siblings, teachers if you were bold. Koosh balls had this weird magnetic appeal. You could not stop holding them, tossing them, twirling them in your fingers. They were soft but had just enough weight to land with a satisfying thud. No batteries, no screen. Just a ball of rubber spaghetti that somehow took over classrooms and living rooms alike. You could get them in wild color combos: neon purple, electric blue, radioactive green. You always knew someone who had 5 of them and never shared. They were fidget toys before that was a category, just something fun to hold when you were daydreaming or zoning out in math class. They even showed up in gym class sometimes, like a weird cross between a dodgeball and a stress reliever. And no matter how many times you lost one, another always seemed to show up at recess. And honestly, they still hold up. Koosh balls were proof that you did not need much to be entertained, just a handful of rubber and a little imagination. When MTV launched in the early 80s, it felt like the future had arrived. "I want my MTV" was not just a slogan. It was a mission statement. Music videos all day, every day. You could see your favorite artists, not just hear them. Suddenly, music had a look. You got Madonna in lace and bangles. You got Prince, all velvet and fire. You got Michael Jackson turning sidewalks into light shows. It was not just about the songs anymore. It was about the story, the drama, the vibe. MTV gave music a stage, and the whole world started watching. For teenagers, it was a lifeline. A taste of freedom, rebellion, and art beamed directly into your bedroom. It was loud, it was new, and it was completely addictive. It was not just a music channel, it was a cultural compass. What aired on MTV often decided what posters went on your wall and what jacket you wore to school. MTV changed everything: how we dressed, what we cared about, and how we understood pop culture. And nothing has ever felt quite as cool since. In 1984, a tiny gray-haired woman stood at a fast food counter, stared down at an oversized hamburger bun, and asked the question that would define a decade. Where's the beef? 3 words. That was all it took. The commercial was short, simple, and absolutely unforgettable. Suddenly, Clara Peller was a national sensation. Kids said it, adults said it, politicians said it. Where's the beef? Turned into code for everything, not just skimpy hamburgers. If something felt like a ripoff or did not deliver, boom, you asked the question. Wendy's took a jab at their competitors and struck gold. And let us be honest, it felt earned. The 80s were flashy, loud, and all about getting the real deal. No one wanted fluff. No one wanted filler. People wanted substance, even in their drive-through orders. And this ad called it out, point blank. There was something magical about how honest it was. No frills, no jingle, just a grumpy old lady calling out nonsense. It hit that sweet spot between hilarious and relatable, and it stuck. Even if you had never been to a Wendy's, you knew that line. The slogan made it onto t-shirts, buttons, and bumper stickers. It even ended up in a presidential campaign. The commercial only aired for a little while, but the impact was forever. It was not just about fast food. It was about not settling for less. The 80s had a way of taking the smallest moments and turning them into cultural lightning bolts. And this one lit up the whole country. If you did not have a pogo ball, or as some called it, a Lolo ball, then you definitely borrowed one from a neighbor or a classmate. It looked like a rubber planet squished through a plastic ring, and the only instructions you needed were, stand on it, now bounce. That was it. Simple, kind of impossible, totally addictive. You stepped on the sides, gripped with your sneakers, and tried to bounce without flying off like a cartoon character. Most kids wiped out within seconds, but the ones who mastered it, they were gods, recess legends. It did not matter that there was zero stability, or that you were one bad bounce away from a twisted ankle. You kept trying. Because bouncing on a pogo ball felt like pure, unfiltered 80s energy. It was like someone looked at a pogo stick and said, let's make it harder, more dangerous, and more fun. They came in bold colors: neon green, purple, electric orange. And once you got the hang of it, you did not just bounce, you performed. Spin tricks, hop races, bouncing contests where the winner was the last kid still upright. Your knees hated it. Your parents hated it. But you felt unstoppable. There were no screens, no rules, just gravity and chaos and a big weird ball that turned sidewalks into obstacle courses. And the best part? Falling down was half the fun. Few things screamed, "I'm cool and I know it," louder than strutting down the street with a boombox slung over your shoulder. It was not about convenience. It was about presence. You were carrying an event in stereo. These were not small, polite radios. These were massive, metal-edged machines that needed 8D batteries and weighed more than your backpack. But you did not care. Because when you hit play and Run DMC or LL Cool J came blasting out, you turned the sidewalk into a music video. Boomboxes were statements. If you had one, you were not just listening, you were sharing. You were broadcasting your taste, your style, your attitude. They came in chrome, black, brushed steel, sometimes even bright colors. Some had dual cassette decks for mixtapes. Some had digital equalizers with tiny sliders you would adjust even if you had no idea what they did. You could flip the speaker balance back and forth just to show off. The sound was loud, raw, and full of static, but it was yours. Carrying it on your shoulder, that was the move. A subtle flex, a mobile concert. You were not just playing music, You were part of the rhythm of the street. Everyone heard you coming. Everyone felt it. Today, people walk around with tiny earbuds and silent playlists. Back then, you brought the bass with you, and the whole block knew your name. There was something deeply satisfying about peeling a Colorform sticker off its shiny backing and pressing it onto that glossy background scene, only to lift it up and try something else seconds later. Colorforms were like magic for kids who did not want to commit to crayons. No mess, no rules, just vinyl cutouts and endless imagination. You could dress up cartoon characters, rearrange entire landscapes, or build weird little abstract collages that made perfect sense in your head. And the best part? You could always start over. That was the joy. No ruined drawings, no wasted paper. You were the director, the set designer, the costume artist, all in one. There were color forms for everything. Scooby-Doo, The Muppets, He-Man, Rainbow Bright, Star Wars. The licensing deals were endless. And if you were lucky, your set came in a slick folding case that made you feel like a professional. Something about the tackiness of the vinyl, the weird rubbery smell, the smooth plastic surface. It made playtime feel like something important. These were not just stickers. They were tools. Tools for telling stories, experimenting, creating. And even if you did the exact same scene 100 times, it never got old. Colorforms taught us that imagination was not something you had to clean up after. It was something you could keep on replay. Stirrup pants and slouch socks were the uniform of cool. You pulled on those tight, stretchy pants, foot straps securing them in place like you were about to hit the slopes, not the school hallway. They clung to your legs like shrink wrap, but that was the point. You looked put together. Add a pair of thick, scrunched-up slouch socks over your high-top sneakers, and suddenly you were runway ready for homeroom. These were the power moves of 80s fashion, and yes, you always doubled up. Pink on white, blue on neon green. The more contrast, the better. Bonus points if the socks matched your scrunchie or your oversized sweater. This look worked for literally every occasion. Roller rinks, mall hangouts, dance class, family photos. Stirrup pants were comfy and versatile, but they looked like effort. You felt grown up in them, like a cross between a jazz dancer and a fashion mogul. And the slouch socks? Those were your attitude. You could not wear just one pair. No, it had to be layered, voluminous, loud. Walking down the hall felt like walking a fashion show, every squeak of rubber soles echoing with pride. This was peak 80s style, bold, stretchy, and unapologetically coordinated. We did not just wear outfits, we assembled them. And we did it with flair, polyester, and a drawer full of socks thicker than our social studies textbook. Clancys Hamburgers was not flashy, but that was exactly the point. This Midwestern chain was a tribute to the good old days. Think 1950s diner vibes with a 1980s sensibility. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and jukeboxes that never worked quite right. The menu was simple. Hamburgers, fries, shakes, and maybe a tenderloin sandwich if you were feeling wild. But the flavor? Solid, dependable. The kind of burger that made you feel like everything was going to be just fine, even if you still had homework due. Clancys peaked during the Reagan era, when families were looking for a bit of nostalgia with their ketchup. The chain kept it local, tight, and grounded, mostly popping up in Indiana and surrounding states. While national giants expanded aggressively, Clancys stayed close to home. That was part of its charm, and maybe part of its downfall. Eventually, as tastes shifted and bigger players took over the burger scene, Clancys began to disappear. But it never truly left the hearts of the folks who grew up on its milkshakes and diner tunes. If Clancys was the taste of Americana, our next stop had a flavor all its own. Crunchy, spicy, and bright red as a fire truck, all straight out of the streets of Los Angeles. The Canoe rental shack by the creek was not a business so much as a suggestion. A crooked sign, 3 boats tied to a tree, and a man named Gary who might have been there since 1948. Dad would slap a 20 into Gary's hand and say, "We'll be back in a couple hours," like it was no big deal. No forms, no helmets, no waiver. Just a paddle, a life vest that definitely had not been certified since Eisenhower, and you, wobbling into a canoe while Dad shoved you off the bank with one foot. Once you got going, though, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize just how loud life usually is. Birds overhead, water slapping against the side, and Dad telling the same story about how he once saw a snapping turtle the size of a garbage can. You never saw one, but you wanted to. You learned how to steer, sort of, and how to duck when you went under a low branch too late. You got soaked, you laughed, and when you finally dragged the canoe back onto dry land, Dad would clap you on the shoulder like you had just completed Navy SEAL training. But if that creek showed you the earth, the next place aimed a little higher, right up into the stars. If the 1980s had a soundtrack, it blared from a boombox. Big, bulky, and proud, the boombox was more than just a stereo. It was a statement. You carried it on your shoulder not because it was easy, but because it was loud. It was rebellion with a battery pack. Hip-hop rose from sidewalks and city blocks, and the boombox was its pulpit. Breakdancers made cardboard stages. Crowds formed like rituals. The music roared, and the city danced. These machines brought bass into backyards, rhythm into corners, and unity into chaos. Whether it was Grandmaster Flash or Run DMC, whether it was Michael Jackson or Madonna, the boombox did not care. It amplified whoever held the power cord. You controlled the vibe. And that mattered. It mattered so much. Because in an era without streaming, without smartphones, without wireless speakers, the boombox gave you freedom. The louder you played, the louder you were. It was not just about music, it was about identity, expression, and claiming your own tiny stage wherever you stood. Lums was born from a hot dog stand and became something like a fever dream of mid-century Americana meets tiki bar chic. Founded in Miami, this oddball restaurant chain made a name for itself with its signature beer-steamed hot dogs. Yes, beer-steamed. It sounds weird until you try it. The result was a hot dog with just a hint of hoppy goodness, nestled in a bun that soaked it all up like a sponge. But Lums was more than just its dogs. It had fried clams, tiki drinks, and decor that made you feel like you had wandered into a vacation. Palm fronds, bamboo, and plastic parrots set the tone. The vibe was easygoing, slightly eccentric, and always a little bit boozy, even if you were just there for the onion rings. At its peak, Lums had hundreds of locations, including one right on the Las Vegas Strip. But as the 80s rolled on, the novelty wore off and the chain dwindled. Still, if you ever sat down at Lums with a giant menu, a plate of clams, and a tall frosty mug, you know it had a strange magic. But if Lums was all about weird combinations, the next place made celebrations the main course, with parades, sirens, and a dessert so big they dared you to finish it. The strip mall pet store did not smell like adventure. It smelled like wood shavings and fish food. But when Dad said, "Let's stop in for a minute," you knew it meant 20. The walls were lined with glass tanks full of turtles, frogs, and fish that looked too bright to be real. You would press your nose against the glass and point. "That one. I want that one." Dad would shake his head and smile. "We're not getting a turtle." 5 minutes later, you were holding a goldfish in a plastic bag, trying not to spill it on the seat of the car. He was not a pushover. He just knew the power of a memory. And that pet store, as humble as it was, felt like a mini zoo to you. There was always one sleepy lizard under a heat lamp and a parrot that squawked like a broken doorbell. Sometimes you would hear, "Hey there," from across the room and realize the bird was mocking you. Dad would strike up a conversation with the guy behind the counter like they were old war buddies, swapping advice on filters and food pellets. You would head home with a tank, a packet of food, and a new responsibility you were not quite ready for. And when you were ready for something outdoorsy, Dad knew just the place, with canoes and no life jackets in sight. No one was ready, not the music industry, not the public, not even the moon, which he would soon walk across. In 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller, a title that would come to define the very heartbeat of pop culture. This was not just an album, it was a tidal wave. Every track felt like it could carry its own legacy, but it was the music video, the short film really, that sent shockwaves through every living room in America. red leather jackets, ghoulish dance moves, Vincent Price's eerie monologue echoing into a generation's dreams. It was scary. It was sexy. It was genius. Thriller redefined what a pop star could be. Michael was no longer just a singer. He was a world builder, a visual storyteller, a phenomenon. He shattered racial barriers on MTV, igniting a cultural shift that went beyond music. Parents, kids, teens, grandmothers, everyone danced, everyone watched. Thriller became a global obsession, and suddenly Halloween had a new anthem: the glove, the lean, the laugh. It was not just entertainment, it was an event. To be alive in the 80s was to live in the shadow of Thriller. And to this day, nothing has ever moved quite like it. The ground round was chaos, comfort, and childhood all wrapped into one. It was the kind of place where parents could get a beer and a burger while their kids threw peanut shells on the ground like it was encouraged. Because it was. The floors were covered in crunchy peanut bits. The air was filled with laughter and the faint smell of popcorn. There were projectors running old cartoons on the wall and kids with balloons trailing behind them like little parade floats. It was loud, it was joyful, and best of all, it felt like no one was trying to rush you out. The ground round leaned into its identity, part sports bar, part family funhouse. There was even a time when the cost of your meal was based on your weight. No, seriously, it was all part of the strange charm that kept people coming back. But as dining trends shifted and the novelty faded, so did the chain. Still, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the crunch of a peanut shell underfoot. But if you were more into burgers and football than cartoons and chaos, our next place might have been your regular haunt. The Dented Can discount grocery store was the kind of place you never admitted shopping at, unless you were Dad. Then it was a badge of honor. You did not bring a list here. You brought instincts. Aisles of unlabeled tins, faded labels, and cardboard signs scribbled in permanent marker, 10 cans for $1. What cans? Who knew? Dad would hold one up and say, "Beef chunks and gravy." Sounds promising, like he was about to enter it in a cooking competition. Most of the time it was mystery meat roulette, but we were not there for the menu. We were there for the thrill. He treated the whole store like an auction. "Name brand beans. Get them while they last," he would whisper, like a man uncovering buried treasure. At checkout, he would proudly announce how much he saved, never mind the fact that dinner might be spaghetti and something we would call tomato adjacent. You learned to laugh, to try everything once, and to realize a meal made on the cheap still meant you had one. But for a different kind of treasure, tucked away in someone's garage, let me tell you about the model train shop that made time stand still. They were not just actors. They were a reflection in the mirror of every teenager who ever felt lost, loud, or completely misunderstood. The Brat Pack did not invent high school drama, but they made it feel real, electric, and terrifyingly close to home. When you watched Molly Ringwald cry in detention, it was not just acting. It was every hallway humiliation, every awkward crush, and every secret you thought nobody else could possibly understand. John Hughes gave them the scripts, but it was the actors, Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, Anthony Michael Hall, who gave the 80s its voice. These films did not just entertain, they defined. The Breakfast Club was not a movie, it was a therapy session. 16 Candles felt like a personal diary read aloud. Pretty in Pink asked whether love could survive cliques in class. They gave heart to rebellion, soul to sarcasm, and face to the faceless. The Brat Pack were not perfect, but they were ours. Messy, funny, fragile, and unforgettable. Their films dared to be earnest in a time of cynicism and cool, and decades later, they still feel like a warm letter from your teenage self, sealed in a VHS case, waiting to be remembered. Pup and Taco was one of those places that never made it all the way across the country. But for Californians, it was a staple. You knew what to expect. A wide menu, dirt cheap prices, and a name that sounded like it was made up by a kid. Hot dogs, tacos, burgers, fries, slushies, they threw it all at the wall and somehow it worked. You could walk up, grab a chili dog and a taco, and be out in 5 minutes for under $3. The locations were easy to spot too. Those retro signs with the big red and yellow block letters were a beacon to beach bums and budget-conscious teens alike. There was nothing gourmet about it, but that was never the point. It was fast, it was greasy, and it was loved. So much so, in fact, that Taco Bell bought most of the locations in the 1980s, essentially absorbing Pup and Taco into its own empire. The quirky name might be gone, but the spirit lives on every time someone adds a side of nachos to their burrito order. And while Pup and Taco ruled the roadside, our next stop was the king of the mall food court. Soft, warm, twisted, and salted. The pretzel that walked so others could run. There was no intention to buy anything, and everyone knew it. The furniture store with the free popcorn machine was Dad's idea of a Saturday outing. You would walk in and get hit with that smell, leather, fresh carpet, and hot butter. Dad would head straight for the recliners, and you? Straight to the red and silver popcorn machine near the back. It was always humming, full of those little white bags that were supposed to be single-serve, but somehow you found a way to go back 5 times without getting caught. Meanwhile, Dad was doing his test sit. That meant stretching, sighing, and rocking the recliner back and forth like he was making a real decision. "Too stiff," he would say. "This one's a back killer." The sales guy always came over and Dad would nod along, arms crossed, like he was closing in on the deal of the century. But you knew he was not buying a couch, he just liked the idea of picking one. And that popcorn? It was better than movie theater popcorn because it was earned. All this to say, shopping never felt like shopping with Dad. It felt like a game. But speaking of buttons, lights, and games, let me tell you about the kind of place where Dad's inner nerd really came to life. Madonna was not just a pop star, she was a cultural earthquake in stilettos. With every music video, every outfit, every defiant stare into the camera, she redefined what it meant to be a woman on stage. Like a Virgin was not just a song, it was a dare, a challenge to tradition, a celebration of contradiction. She was innocence and provocation, lace gloves and rosaries, punk attitude and disco flair. No one looked like her. No one acted like her. And that was the point. In a world trying to box in femininity, Madonna kicked the walls down in heels. She made fashion dangerous again. Layered bracelets, teased hair, oversized crucifixes. Suddenly, teen girls everywhere were dressing like her, talking like her, being her. Her fashion was not an accessory to her music. It was the message: be bold, be loud, be unapologetically you. She did not just influence trends, she created blueprints. And behind the sequins and fishnets was something deeper. The idea that pop could be powerful, that glam could be gritty, and that no one had to ask permission to be seen. Madonna turned rebellion into runway. She gave attitude a soundtrack. And for anyone growing up in the 80s, she was proof that being different could make you unforgettable. Po Folks was Southern hospitality wrapped in gingham and served with a ladle. You walked in and felt like you had stepped onto a front porch somewhere in Alabama. The tea came in mason jars. The walls were covered in antiques and hand-painted signs with sayings like, "Y'all come back now." And the food? It stuck to your ribs. Fried chicken, black-eyed peas, greens, meatloaf, and catfish, served with a side of cornbread and a whole lot of love. Po Folks made you feel like family, even if you were just passing through. There was a certain pride in the way it presented its Southern roots, unapologetically kitschy and warm. The prices were low, the portions were generous, and the vibe was always laid back. You were not there to rush. You were there to eat slow, talk loud, and maybe top it all off with some banana pudding. At its peak, Po Folks had locations across the South and Midwest, but as dining tastes shifted and the novelty faded, many closed down or rebranded. Still, that logo, an old-timey fella tipping his hat, lingers in the minds of diners who remember the hush puppies and home fries. But if you preferred your meals wrapped in foil and served with a little spice, then our next stop had just the chilito for you. The miniature golf course with homemade obstacles was never part of a chain. It was part of someone's backyard that got out of hand. The fence leaned, the AstroTurf peeled at the corners, and the scorecards were photocopies from sometime around 1967. But to Dad, this was sacred ground. "Watch out for the windmill," he would say, pointing to a lopsided contraption that spun more out of habit than engineering. Hole 6 had a dinosaur, once green, now a sad grayish blue with a missing eye, and Hole 9 was uphill into what looked like a mailbox from a sci-fi movie. Dad kept score with one of those tiny pencils, sometimes generous, sometimes forgetting that penalty stroke. He cheered every shot like you had just qualified for a Masters tournament, and when he sunk a hole in one, he would raise his hands like he had won a trophy. The best part? Ice cream sandwiches at the end, slightly melted from the cooler behind the counter. You never asked for anything more. But if the ground game was that magical, just wait until you went airborne, watching planes take off from a sleepy little airport that felt like your own private runway. Shoulder pads were not just a fashion choice. They were a power move. In the 80s, women were stepping into boardrooms, climbing corporate ladders, and making sure they were seen, and their clothes spoke volumes. Blazers were built like armor, structured to demand respect. It was fashion designed to take up space. For the first time, silhouettes were not about softness. They were about strength. Joan Collins and Linda Evans on Dynasty made it glamorous. Real-life professionals made it revolutionary. Women wanted to be taken seriously in a world that still doubted their presence. And what better way to announce yourself than with broad shoulders and bold suits? These outfits said, "I am here, I am not afraid, and I have earned my place." Skirts got shorter, heels got higher, and ambition got louder. You could hear it in the clack of pumps on polished floors. You could see it in the structured cuts of every outfit on Wall Street. This was more than fashion. It was feminist defiance wrapped in fabric. And underneath all that padding was the undeniable truth. Women were rewriting the rules. One outfit at a time. Power dressing did not just make a statement, it became the voice. Long before Auntie Anne's took over shopping malls with that sweet almond glaze and cinnamon sugar swagger, there was Hot Sam Pretzels. This place was the original mall pretzel joint. The smell hit you like a buttery wall the moment you walked in. Their pretzels were big, doughy, salty, and piping hot. Perfect for tearing apart with your bare hands in between trips to the arcade and the food court. What made Hot Sam special was that it felt like it had always been there. You never planned to go to Hot Sam. You just walked past, caught a whiff, and suddenly you were standing in line. The classic salted pretzel was the favorite, but if you were bold, you went for the cheese-stuffed or even the jalapeno variety. They did not have 20 sauces or dipping cups. They had mustard. That was it. And it was glorious. Eventually, the brand got merged with Pretzel Time, and later, Auntie Anne's took over the pretzel game for good. But for kids of the 80s, Hot Sam was the flavor of an afternoon well spent. Speaking of things that left a taste and a legacy, our next stop is a little more complicated. A pancake house turned national chain, now remembered as much for controversy as it is for maple syrup. Radio Shack. You did not go to Radio Shack to shop. You went there to touch. The moment you walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. Racks of wires, batteries, and gadgets you had never even heard of. And in the middle of it all, the demo table, a flashing, beeping paradise. Dad would say, "We're just browsing," but an hour later, he was still pressing buttons, turning knobs, and pretending he was building a satellite in the garage. You would find the mini keyboard and try to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" while he talked tech with the teenage clerk behind the counter. Every once in a while, he would point at something and say, "I had one of these back in college," even if he definitely did not. He would pick up a transistor radio, weigh it in his hand like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem, and give a long, low whistle. Solid piece of work. He never bought anything over $20, but you always walked out feeling like you had been part of a NASA mission. If imagination had a store, it was that one. And right around the corner from that tech wonderland, a pet store where you begged, and somehow always walked out with something in a plastic bag. Going to the movies in the 1980s was not just an outing, it was an initiation. You did not just watch Back to the Future, you traveled in time. You did not just see E.T., You believed in aliens, friendship, and flying bikes. The Goonies made treasure hunts seem plausible in your own backyard. Ghostbusters had you checking every closet for slime. These were not just movies. They were portals, promises, and rites of passage. Every frame was burned into memory, every line quoted in playgrounds and lunchrooms. Blockbusters were not about selling tickets. They were about shaping imaginations. They gave us John Williams scores that made hearts race and Spielberg visions that made magic feel real. Crowds lined up outside theaters, popcorn in hand, hearts pounding. Parents, kids, teens, they all came together in the darkness of a movie theater to be transformed. These films were louder, brighter, funnier, and somehow deeper than anything that came before. And when the credits rolled, you did not leave the theater the same person who walked in. You left dreaming, you left changed. The movies of the 1980s did not just entertain a generation, they raised one. Roy Rogers restaurants were like a little piece of the Wild West dropped into your suburban strip mall. Named after the cowboy icon himself, this place stood out by offering more than just burgers. Sure, they had roast beef sandwiches and fried chicken that made fast food feel home-cooked, but the real magic? The Fixin's Bar, a glorious buffet of condiments, toppings, and extras that turned a plain sandwich into your own custom creation. Lettuce, pickles, onions, jalapenos, barbecue sauce, horseradish, you name it. It was all very yeehaw, but make it fast. For a time in the 1980s, Roy Rogers had a strong presence along the East Coast and highway rest stops, becoming a favorite for travelers and locals alike. Eventually, competition from giants like McDonald's and Wendy's squeezed them out of many markets. But those who remember still talk about it fondly, especially that legendary Fixin's Bar. And speaking of names that never quite fit, our next restaurant had an identity so split it changed from a queen to a druther, yet still stayed as comforting as ever. The all-you-can-fit Junkyard was not a store. It was a scavenger hunt with tetanus on the side. Dad would wear his work pants, which meant they had oil stains older than you were, and he would grab a wrench like he was Indiana Jones about to head into the temple. The guy at the front desk waved him through like an old friend. "Take whatever you can carry," he said, and Dad took that as a challenge. Rows and rows of sun-bleached cars with their guts spilled out, broken washing machines, and lawn mowers that had definitely seen war. Dad would pop a hood, grunt like he found treasure, and climb inside the thing like he was becoming one with it. Meanwhile, you were busy poking through the wreckage and came across something unforgettable, an actual raccoon skull. No idea how it got there. You just knew it was going in your backpack. At some point, Dad would emerge, sweaty and victorious, holding a car mirror or some hose that just needed a clean. It was less about the parts and more about the hunt. And when the sun started setting and he said, "We've got time for one more stop," you hoped it would be the fishing hole, the one no one else knew about. Before Nintendo, video games were gasping for breath. After Nintendo, they were alive again. It was 1985 when the Nintendo Entertainment System hit American shelves and changed living rooms forever. The gray and red console was a Trojan horse, simple in design but hiding worlds inside. Suddenly, you were not just a kid. You were Mario, leaping through pipes to save the princess. You were Link, braving dungeons for the Triforce. You were part of something massive. Nintendo did not just bring games. It brought heroes. It brought soundtracks you could hum in your sleep and cheat codes whispered like secret spells. The controller became an extension of your hand. Blowing into cartridges felt like a ritual, and beating a level felt like beating life itself. For many, Nintendo was not a toy. It was a friend, a daily escape, a safe place to fail and try again. Families gathered around the screen, arguing over whose turn it was. Siblings became rivals. Parents got curious. And the living room was never the same again. With every beep and pixel, Nintendo gave us wonder, and it never asked for anything more than time and imagination. Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips felt like someone dropped a British pub right into the middle of American suburbia, minus the beer and with a lot more deep frying. Named after the dapper English actor known for playing butlers in old films, This spot promised the classic British fish and chips experience, but with a crispy, golden American twist. The fish, flaky, crunchy, and always steaming. The chips, thick-cut fries that could double as a side or a meal, depending on how hungry you were. And do not forget the little tubs of malt vinegar that gave the whole meal a tangy kick. It was greasy comfort food at its finest, wrapped in paper and handed over with a wink. In its heyday, Arthur Treacher's had hundreds of locations scattered across the country. It was the place for people who wanted something fried but just a little different than burgers or chicken. Over time, competition and changing tastes wore it down. Most locations shuttered, leaving only a handful hanging on. But for anyone who grew up with one nearby, the smell of fried cod and vinegar still triggers a flood of memories. And speaking of memories, the next place on our list serves them up by the tray, with old-school charm, a flat-top grill, and a name that still rings out across the Midwest. If you smiled at any of these, tell us your favorite below, tap like, and hit subscribe for more 80s magic.